My belief is, and I think I share this with most of our community, is that we have a limited amount of time to solve our energy and our sustainability and our pollution problems. And at the heart of many of those problems lies better materials. Better materials for wind, for solar, more durable materials, replacement for plastics that pollute our environment. There's no way that we can software our way out of our current situation, our current dilemma of pollution and need for energy, an increased need for energy, which is essentially scales with our population. The more people we have, the more energy we need, especially also if we need the same living standard, all of us. So the need for energy production that needs to come from something else than fossil fuels has to come from sustainable resources, and those are all inherently materials-based. They're limited by their materials. So it's crucial, absolutely critical.
Materialen zijn de grote passie van Kristin Persson. Ooit wilde ze operazangeres worden, maar ze werd verliefd op de kwantummechanica. Nu is ze hoogleraar materiaalkunde aan het Berkeley Laboratorium onder de rook van San Francisco. Zij wil ieder gewenst materiaal letterlijk vanaf scratch kunnen ontwerpen.
I dream of being able to produce or propose new materials quickly in the computer. Also being able to, in the computer, by simulations, come up with a synthesis procedure and conditions that is very likely to have a high amount of success. And when I've done both of those, I allow my computer to direct an automated lab to make the materials quickly and then test them for whatever functionality that I think that material is going to be good for. And that iterative loop is entirely automated. And I can stop it as a human being anytime and go in and give my own direction and guidance to it, but that it keeps on iterating over and over until we found something better. So we can do better in terms of our sustainable energy production, storage, our need of plastics should be replaced by something that is much more recyclable than we have today.
Designing.
Yes, designing materials completely autonomously, from computations to synthesis to characterization and functionality. I don't know if you've seen the movie Iron Man. Mm-hmm. So there's a really good clip in that movie. I can probably show you.
Yeah.
Periodic table. Right here.
Tony Stark has Jarvis, and Jarvis is his materials project, right? And he does a number of simulations.
485 simulations.
Well, it's a new day. Let's try cerium and dysprosium.
So he picks out cool sounding elements like dysprosium and cerium, and then he synthesizes it in his hands in the computer. He tests this for some amount of properties.
Initiate.
Initiating palladium replacement test. Number 486.
And he does this in a matter of 30 seconds, 40 seconds.
That's something you would like to do.
Oh, I'd love this. I want Jarvis.
Het belang van onze materialen moet niet onderschat worden volgens Persson. Kennis van materialen is essentieel om te overleven.
Materials are incredibly important. If you look at our history, we have changed the way we live depending on what materials we had available. We name our ages after materials, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, because they had such a tremendous impact on how we lived, how our society developed. Now, it takes a whole age, right, to come up with new materials. It tells you how difficult it is. Traditionally, we call it cook and look. We sort of cook something up, we make a material, we heat it up, we test it for functionality, for properties. And that's very slow. So coming up with better ways of designing materials that are faster will allow us to change our society again for the better, hopefully, to make it more sustainable, to feed more people, to feed them and to transport ourselves in a way that doesn't destroy the earth.
10 jaar geleden startte Persson haar materialenproject. Ze wilde alle data verzamelen van alle niet-organische materialen die we kennen.
It has rare earths in it, like neodymium.
Het Materialen-project zit vol met de eigenschappen van atomen en moleculen.
You can also see that they look fairly open. And these open pores are used for absorbing gases, water, CO2.
Zo bevat het bijvoorbeeld ook de verschillende eigenschappen die moleculen kunnen hebben als hun atomen net iets anders geordend zijn in hun kristalvorm.
So here, this is a fairly simple example. There's just one element. It's just carbon, so it's one of the elements in the periodic table. And this is if I put the carbon atoms, all the little black atoms, in the diamond structure, you get something very pretty. You get diamond, which is very hard. It's formed under high temperature and pressure. But if you put the carbon atoms in this kind of arrangement, in this crystal structure that we call it, then you get something called graphite, which we put in our pencils and is quite soft. Because that's how we write, right? So that's how the little carbon atoms, these layers flake off as I write with my pencil. So the same atom put in two different crystal structures can have vastly different properties. Things like the transparency of diamond and the non-transparency of graphite, that can be calculated. So many of these properties can now be calculated entirely from first principles, which wasn't really possible 20, 30 years ago.
Door gebruik te maken van supersnelle computers kunnen nu allerlei nieuwe eigenschappen berekend worden. Het Materialen-project wordt daarmee een inspiratiebron om nieuwe materialen te ontdekken of zelfs te ontwerpen.
If I were to ask my daughters, give me a good battery material. Yeah. My daughter, they would go straight to their computer or their phone and they would Google it. Good battery material, give me some ideas. So if you do that, you're going to get some of the existing battery materials that exist today, that there are many articles about. That's what Google can do. But if you're asking Google or any kind of search engine to come up with a new material, it can't do it. Because the information that you need to design materials, all those different properties, they're not available to Google. And Google can only give us what's already in our knowledge bank. So data, materials data, does not exist in any kind of organized form in the world. So Google can't reach that. So the most important thing, if we're going to design novel materials faster, is we first have to know how can we couple crystal structure and chemistry to materials properties. We need lots and lots of data. Similar to if you were to say I want to go to a restaurant tonight. Which restaurant should I go to? You Google it, you go on your favorite app to figure out where are good restaurants, because the data is there, because lots of people have put in recommendations and reviews of restaurants, right? Similarly, you can think about if we'd had materials data, reviews, like metrics on materials, we could select better where to go, what kind of materials we would like for certain functionality. So that information hasn't been there. Even though we had thousands of years of materials development, we have not been particularly good about saving materials data and saving materials properties in any kind of organized form. And we haven't been able to measure it either.
And that's where your material project
So that's where the materials project comes in. When we were suddenly able to calculate materials properties, it started to make sense to, instead of just calculating for a particular grant or a particular problem that I was having, to just blanket the space. Can we calculate everything? Every single property we can calculate for every possible known material, and then start going beyond known materials and putting the atoms in different new places that people had never seen before. So that's what we pitched 10 years ago to the Department of Energy here at the Berkeley Lab, to create such a database of materials properties that would just keep on growing from our efforts, but also from community efforts. Other people measuring or calculating materials properties, and we're willing to give it to this public resource that everybody can access for free. That was the dream.
It's open?
It's completely open. Anyone can use it.
Iedereen kan dus gebruik maken van het Materialen-project. En dat deed Google ook. Zo blijkt uit deze video van de website AI Revolution.
So Google DeepMind, the brains behind the AI system AlphaFold, which predicts protein structures, has now unveiled another remarkable AI tool, Gnome. This new tool is a game changer in the field of AI, capable of discovering hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions, of new materials at an unprecedented
Het
pace.
genoomproject van Google's AI-machine DeepMind heeft zich gestort op het bedenken van miljoenen mogelijke verbindingen, waarbij ze gebruik maken van de data uit het materialenproject van Persson. Zaten er tot voor kort 150.000 verschillende materialen in haar project, de komende maanden worden er, dankzij Genome, 380.000 nieuwe materialen aan toegevoegd.
So Genome is a group within DeepMind that have focused specifically on developing, on using their compute and their workflows built on what our 10 years of experience at the Materials Project. So we help them we've been doing these high throughput calculations for 10 years, for a decade. So we said, just look, take whatever we've learned, deploy it on your computers, and you can now come up with novel algorithms of designing new materials. So they've been doing that. They've been taking our knowledge, our workflows, but also developing their own machine learning and artificial intelligence workflows on top of that data to come up with new materials, substituting in different atoms and different structures to get new possible structures that are hopefully that are predicted to be stable against other materials in that chemical space.
Because they use AI sort of to analyze this all?
They used AI to figure out let's take a crystal structure again, that can be helpful. So here is a nice crystal structure called rock salt. And if let's say, so this is a rock salt that you would know as is table salt, sodium chloride, where the sodium and the chlorine, they sit in these two different positions. Now, I may ask you, are there other possible elements that I can put in the rock salt structure that would have different properties than table salt? And that seems like a decent question to ask. So what the genome algorithm does, it basically predicts, based on all the different information it has about how atoms like to sit in these different crystal structures, what are possible new elements that I can put in this structure to get something that might be stable, that people can synthesize, and that might have new functionalities. So that's what their algorithm does. It comes up with new, stable materials in chemical spaces where we haven't seen them before.
And what do you ask the AI then? What do you ask them?
So you can ask, for example, give me a new structure in a particular chemical space that is likely to be synthesizable. Doesn't tell you about its properties yet. It just tells you that there is a crystal structure with a particular chemistry that's very likely to be synthesizable, or something close to that space. So it gives us new candidates to work from, to start as a starting point. It's almost like exploring a whole universe of possible candidate materials that may have really exciting functionalities that can help us for the future.
Nou is het bedenken van talloze nieuwe verbindingen één ding. Je moet ze ook allemaal maken en testen.
If you go into the labs here at Berkeley Lab, where we have a lot of students and postdocs and scientists making materials in the lab, it is still very much a manual process of grinding things and heating them up and putting them in the furnace, taking them out of the furnace, grinding them again, adding different kinds of precursors, additions to the material, and then seeing what kind of properties, and testing it takes time too. So yeah, it's very, very much a slow trial and error process of making materials. We have to accelerate that part as well. So adding robotics and automation to the synthesis and characterization process will also accelerate that part of the design cycle of materials development.
And that's what you do here.
That's what we do here too. We have something called the A-Lab, the automated lab, which is the beginning of looking at or synthesizing solid state materials from solid state synthesis, which is industrially relevant, in a completely closed automated loop. It all starts here. This is the mixing station where the robot takes different chemicals out of the brown vials and puts them together, mixes them well using a solvent, and then they end up in these little forms. And then another robot comes up on the rail here, picks up the form and puts it in one of these 4 or 2 furnaces. So that heats up the material, and that's now getting mixed and blended and starts to form another material. Once it's been heated up, we take out the sample, and we move it over. So again, this robot comes here, opens the furnace, picks up the sample and puts it over there into an X-ray machine that checks what kind of material did we make. And then it talks to the materials project directly to the database, compares the fingerprints of those materials with known materials, the target material we tried to make. And if it made it, great, then a success. If we didn't make it, then it adds that information to the database here and says, this was a failure under these conditions. What can we now do to make it better? And analyzing phase diagrams, analyzing phase stability, we might go back, change the precursors, change the temperatures, change the processing time. So this is a completely autonomous loop between characterization, processing, and mixing of different chemicals, and all of those things can be done autonomously. Imagine the universe of possible materials that we could go after, that we could try to make and test their properties. The computations in the machine learning will help us to focus on the particular bright spots, the bright stars in this universe, instead of spending our time on things that aren't as useful. So because if we can compute their properties and select out the ones that have a higher chance of being better than what we have today, we can spend our time and development and engineering on those materials instead. And that will save us a certain amount of time, and it will also bring better materials to market.
But if you had to design a material world for the future, what would it look like?
It would be it would be focused not just on the performance of the materials and the cost of the materials, but also on its ability to be recycled, to be sustainably produced, less pollution, functionality, yes, but maybe looking at the whole set of properties that we would need materials to perform. I tend to think of materials as a chain with links in them. So certain links are about performance. Maybe we should add a link about how sustainable is the material. How much does it pollute when we produce it and when we recycle it? And that becomes a metric of success as well, which really hasn't been in the past because we haven't been in this situation before. And if you look at our historical record, we have certainly also come up with materials that haven't been good for humanity. When we lauded the advent of plastics in the 40s and 50s, we're currently drowning in plastics pollution all over the world because we didn't design the plastics to be easily recyclable. We designed it to be cheap and durable, and that was it. And there are many companies making a lot of money on the current paradigm of plastics. That doesn't mean you can't make plastic-like, polymer-like materials that can be recycled. And that is something we're building into our design cycle today. When we evaluate the metrics of new materials, we can build in things like how easy is it to break apart the material into little building blocks so that you can assemble it again, and that to be as cheap and easy as possible with relatively clean methods. And building that into our design process is possible. It just makes it a little bit more, you have more metrics to evaluate. And it's still a very active research area, but it can be done. So when we design novel materials in the computer, we can take anything that is computable or anything that we can put a feature or a metric on, those that can be computed, we can add as a design metric. So imagine that I'm computing better battery materials. I'm putting the atoms in different places in my crystal structure. I'm asking the question, how much energy can the material hold? How much lithium can I exchange in that material in and out? I can also ask, how safe is that material? If I charge it to high charge, how unstable does it get? Does it release oxygen, which tends to be the way that battery materials become unsafe? Those are computable metrics. I could also start adding, what kind of elements do I add? How much do they cost to dig out of the ground? What is the pollution associated with certain elements versus others? I could add those metrics. I could add, how easy is it to dissolve certain metals into different clean solutions so I can recycle the battery materials better? Those are all, again, metrics that could be either measured, computed, or incorporated into the design cycle. And the more we become informed about this, the better decisions we can make, that we can send to things like the AI lab, that they can make new materials that can tell us what we're missing, because computation isn't perfect. It can come back and say, yeah, you told me to make this material, it turns out I made something else, or I made some impurities. Try to do better, try to come up with a new synthesis recipe, try to look at a different phase space. So all of these components need to work together to be faster about coming up with materials that are not just highly performant, but that also don't make our life or world dirtier.